Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today we are going to do a horror vlog slash review of 6 spooky season reads. I wanted to do a spooky style vlog for you guys, but I also wanted to include 6 horror books, and I know I talk a lot, so I did think a vlog would probably be the best. So I'm kind of mixing a vlog with a review. With each little section of this video, you guys are gonna get 2 horror books where I'm done reading them. I'm gonna tell you my ratings. I'm going to rate these also on 4 different things that people look for with horror. I'm going to give them a score on weirdness, on intrigue, on scariness, and on gore. That way you guys can look at all of these and figure out, you know, if you're really not into gore, then look for the ones that have a lower gore score, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of what this is. I hope you enjoy. I hope you find at least one book that you like. I am at the end of all 6 reads, so I know what my thoughts were on some of these books, and I am excited for you guys to see what they are. The first 2 books that I have for you guys are Rouge by Mona Awad and We Kept Her in the Cellar by W.R. Gorman. So my goal is to give you guys a variety in this. So these 2 books definitely have a lot of differences. So I'm gonna start with Rouge. The reason I picked this up was because I have read Bunny by Mona Awad, and I ended up rating Bunny 3 stars because I kind of liked it, but I also kind of didn't understand what was going on. And so by the end of the book, I was just kind of in the middle. And I know that that book is so polarizing. So most people give it like a 1 star or a 5 star, and I was right smack dab in the middle. And so I wanted to read something else by Mona Awad just to see what my viewpoints were on another book. And this one, I did end up rating a 3.5 star. I do think I enjoyed this book more than Bunny. And I would say if you are a fantasy reader, if you enjoy fantastical worlds and elements in some of your books, that you will probably like Rouge more than you like Bunny. If you don't like fantasy, I think Bunny is probably more the book that you would want to pick up by this author. If you want to pick up anybody at all, because both of them are confusing. In Rouge, you follow our main character, Belle, who has just lost her mother, and she comes to California. She originally lives in Montreal. She comes to California to figure out how, essentially to settle her mother's life after her mother has passed away in kind of weird circumstances. And so that's kind of a mystery in the background as well. She finds out that her mother is deeply in debt, and she's gonna have to do a lot in order to figure things out. This book, because of the loss of her mother, you do have very slight, but there's still there, evidence of grief throughout the book. I would say the primary theme of this book is beauty and beauty's impact on connection. Both daughter and mother have this connection to a facial regimen. They want to have their skin looking a specific way. And so you get to see kind of the darker elements of some of that. You also have a past timeline going on where you get to see Belle's past with her mother and why they were kind of estranged. Like, they definitely still talk to each other, but they lived in separate countries. They didn't talk very often, and Belle doesn't really seem to be in touch with her mother and what she was doing at the time of her death. And so we get to see the mystery of her kind of unraveling that, and while doing that, getting herself into some weird situations. Most of this book, I was confused. I do think, in my opinion, this book wraps up cleaner than Bunny did, and that's why I rated it higher. Obviously, it's not a ton higher. I rated Bunny 3 stars. This is a 3.5 star. I do think that this is a book I'm gonna continue to think about, though. And I kind of feel that way about Bunny too. So I have contemplated going back and rereading Bunny and seeing what my rating would be a second time around. And I could see doing that with Rouge now that I know what's happened, and I might be able to go back and piece some things together. But I also think that Mona Awad is one that doesn't necessarily want to give us all of the answers, at least from the 2 books that I've read. I feel like that's maybe her MO, but yeah, I don't know. There were pieces of this that I really did enjoy. And I will say every single page, every single day, as I buddy read this with Jolene from Bookworm Adventure Girl. And every single day when I would check in with Jolene, I would end the call with, I'm still really intrigued. And so it does kind of have a way of pulling me in. So I think that's a win. I just wish that it was a little bit more coherent in the end. I'm okay with it seeming fever dreamish if it's supposed to feel fever dreamish. But I think that certain parts of this book should have been more clear. There are definitely some things that were odd. And something else I wanted to mention is that there are these not breadcrumbs, there are, what do I want to call them? Like connection pieces to, homages maybe, to fairy tales in this. So you have like red shoes, red lips, apples, roses. Like there are all these things that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm making stuff up in my head and making connections where there aren't any. But I just feel like there were so many fairy tale, old fairy tale stories that were like little snippets of them were intermittent throughout the story, which was very fun to see. So I am going to give this, on an intrigue level, a score of 5 out of 5. For a scary level, I'll say a 2 out of 5. For a weirdness level, I'll say a 5 out of 5. And for a gore level, I'll go with a 1 out of 5. Next we have We Kept Her in the Cellar, which is a Cinderella retelling flipped on its head. I really enjoyed this. I rated this a 4-star. I think it was just a flat 4-star. Yeah, just a flat 4-star. But I had so much fun. I think that if you enjoy retellings and you like dark retellings, this is something that you should check out. It is definitely horrific. It went to darker places than I thought it was going to, especially in the conclusion. But you follow the storyline of Cinderella, but you follow it from her stepsister's perspective. And so she is preparing, at the very beginning of the book, preparing her homestead and her family for the arrival of her stepfather and her stepsister. And she has a younger sibling that she loves to pieces. And she has always kind of been the person who helps around the house. She helps her mother since her father's passing. And Cinderella gets to the house and weird stuff happens. Like on the first page that you see Cinderella, you know that something is wrong with her. Like she is not a normal human being. And the first interaction that the girls have with her dictates some of what happens with her moving in. And because of these darker elements of Cinderella and how she acts, they keep her in the cellar. Hence the title. And you get to see why she does certain things, or you get to try and figure out like why she does these really dark things, why she acts differently. And the dad has these rules that Cinderella has to follow, and for whatever reason she does follow them. And so you also get to learn how to manipulate a situation. But one of the reasons that I really enjoyed this story is because all of the elements that I know about Cinderella could still be true if I had gotten that information from an outside perspective. So if I was someone in the kingdom and I was looking in on these people who kept their daughter in the cellar, and some events later on, you know, with the ball and the glass slipper and all this stuff, if that were all to have happened the way that an outsider would have viewed it, this story would still work. And I like that. I think it's so creative. I really enjoyed that. I also liked there were some pieces of like Grimm's Brothers stories thrown about in this as well, which was really fun. But it does get a lot darker than I thought it was going to be, a lot gorier than I thought it was going to be with a retelling. A lot of times retellings can be scary, but it's like there seems to be like a line that they won't cross, and this one definitely did. So I think that it was a lot of fun. My scary rating for this would probably be a 2 out of 5. There's not a lot of tension for the reader in this. There are some like elements where, you know, characters might be getting hurt or things like that, but as far as like, I never felt like my heart was racing or anything. That might also be because it's a retelling, and so you do know certain plot points, but I didn't think it was very scary. The intrigue, I would probably give it a 3-star out of 5, or a 3 out of 5. Once again, well, I was gonna say once again because it's a retelling, and so some of it was very predictable, but Cinderella's character was very intriguing and I did want to know more. So maybe I'll give it a 4 out of 5. I will say that some questions about Cinderella are not answered, just so you know. So if you are wanting some things like wrapped up in a pretty little bow at the end, that's probably not gonna happen. But for weirdness, I think I'm gonna give this a 2 out of 5. This is not a confusing story or a story where you're constantly guessing what or why, why is this happening? I do think that a lot of it is pretty clear. And so I do think a 2 out of 5 is fair. There are some things that Cinderella does in particular that you're like, okay, well, that was kind of odd. And so that's hence the 2 out of 5. And the last score, the gore score, I'm gonna say that this is probably a 3 out of 5, maybe a 4 out of 5, so maybe a 3.5. And there are specific moments in this book that are gory. It is not gory throughout, and that's why I'm hesitant to give it a 4 out of 5 for gore. But some of the moments in this book that are gory are really gory and really, I don't want to say gross, like they're not, it's not like Nick Cutter type of book. It's not that. It's just some of the things that happen to people in this story and the descriptions of what happens to their bodies is icky. And yeah, there was one scene with an eyeball, just so you know. So yeah, there are some aspects of gore in the story. So those are the 2 books that I have read so far this month. I will get back to you when I have read the next 2. Back to talk to you guys about the next 2 horror reads, and this time we are going to focus on Fantasticland and The Crane Husband. So I will start with Fantasticland. I rated this a 4.5 star. I really enjoyed this book. And I recently talked about this on my 5-star predictions list that I just posted, but I didn't give you guys like a full rundown of the book because I knew I would be talking about it in this video. If you haven't ever heard of Fantasticland, what you're following is the interviews of people who were impacted by or actually lived through the events that happened inside Fantasticland. Fantasticland is a theme park that is on the, or close enough to the coast of Florida. It ends up getting hit with a very, very severe hurricane. And it just so happens that some people end up not being able to evacuate the area, and so there are people who are stuck in the theme park. And what we are hearing afterwards is this journalist is going around and interviewing the players or the people who happened to stay behind. I really liked the interview aspect of this. I like how the narrator tells you at the beginning of the book how he set up the interviews and the fact that you wouldn't be hearing him question people, but people were telling their stories based on questions that he was leading them and guiding them into certain places and certain events within the park. So I also really enjoyed the fact that there are breadcrumbs in how the stories are ordered is important. So you hear about someone's name and then 3 or 4 stories later they come back into play, and so you know who this person is, and they might pop up multiple times throughout other people's stories, or they might just pop up once. It just depends on the impact of the character. But I really liked this. It was crazy to think how chaotic. You might be thinking like, why is this horror? If you don't know anything about this. Well, it turns out whenever the emergency was done and they were actually able to be evacuated. One, it took way longer than expected to get these people out of the park. I'm not going to tell you how long because that's part of the fun, but so that's part of it. But there were events that led to chaos and destruction and death within this park. So when the National Guard, I think it was, ended up coming in to clear the park for the police and the volunteers, they found decapitated bodies. They found people who were shot. They found people who, essentially, there was a lot of murder and mayhem that happened within this, and that's what you're reading about throughout the park. A lot of the interviews also hone in on the fact that most of the people who were left in this park were between the ages of 18 and 25 because they were the employees of the park. And so there's a theme throughout about connectivity and the fact that people who are of the age 18 through 25 in this world, I think this was written in 2016 or was it 2019? It's one of those two. I'll put it up on the screen so you guys know when it was written. But within, you know, this version of Earth, 18 to 25-year-olds, most of them did not grow up without having the internet and without having this connectivity to the rest of the world, without, you know, they have the world at their fingertips, essentially. And so there's a lot of commentary on how sometimes because of that and because they have never really had to, and it's questioned within the book whether or not this is a reason that events ended up happening the way that they happened, whether or not it's because they've never had to think on their own. They've never been alone without able to be reaching out to people to figure things out, to get support. And so, yeah, it was a really interesting thought experiment, I guess. Really brutal. Definitely check trigger warnings if you're going to read it, but I think it's really good. So as far as, I told you guys it's a 4.5 star, or if I didn't tell you it's a 4.5 star, that's what I ended up rating this book, was a 4.5 star. But I wanted to give you guys my 4 ratings that I gave the first 2 books. So I have a weirdness score. So for this, I would say on a weirdness level, and I'm talking like weird, like Bunny, Rouge, which we talked about in the first clip, I would say maybe this is a 1 out of 5. It's not really confusing. It's not really weird. Now, some of the things that happen are mind-blowing that people would act this way, but, or not. But it's not weird in that way. So really, it's either a 0 or a 1 out of 5 star. For the intrigue, I would say this is a 5 out of 5. I was so intrigued by what was going on, by the questions that people were asking about why these events happened and what led to certain things happening in the park. I was flipping pages. As scary goes, I would say this is probably a 2 out of 5, mainly because of how it's told. If I was in someone's head as these events were going down, it would have been scarier. Whereas the way that it's told, which I really liked, in interviews, you know the people who are talking to you lived. And because of the context of what they're saying, you know who didn't live. If someone speaks about someone, but they use the past tense, you know that person was probably a victim of the park. And so I think as far as scary goes, it wasn't really there. There was definitely mystery and tense moments where you're trying to figure out if, you know, the rumors that are going on about these different subsections of the park, which I didn't talk about in my like little synopsis, but the people who stayed at the park separate themselves into tribes essentially, and all of the tribes are, you know, for themselves and not for anybody else, and that's one of the things that causes the chaos. And so there's definitely, it's an intense situation, but I don't think I was ever scared while reading it. And then the gore level, I would say maybe a 3 or a 4. There's definitely gore in this book, and I can't really say why. I'm gonna say that it's not a 5 because there's one particular element that I think impacts my gore score, but I'm not going to say anything. But there are definitely some elements where you see things that if you're a squeamish person, you're probably gonna be a little icked out. But I don't think it's really bad. So I probably would settle on a 3 out of 5. So I think this so far is my favorite of the vlog. We'll have to see in the third clip if I have anything that's better than this one. But I was sitting there thinking about the ratings that I gave the first 2 books, but I definitely think that this is my favorite so far. So Fantasticland for the win. I now need to talk to you about The Crane Husband, which I rated a 3 out of 5 stars. This book just wasn't for me. It is very short, so if you are interested in novellas, this might be something that I would recommend. You follow a 15-year-old girl, I think, and her brother live with her mother, who is a single mother on a farm that they don't own. They are not in great financial straits. Her mother is an artist, and she brings home a crane one day, and you know, the crane husband. So literally she tells her kids to call him father on day 1. It's very bizarre. The themes in this book are really kind of at the forefront. They're at the heart of this. I believe this is a book about generational trauma, and specifically from mother to daughter. There's a lot of stories and metaphor in this about literally flying away from responsibility, and sometimes, you know, you fly away and you get to live your dreams, and other times you fly away and you die. And so, and you don't necessarily know what the answer is. There's a lot also about sometimes children not being at the forefront of adults' decisions in their lives, and someone who feels like their family is tying them down. So overall, this book was just really depressing for me. I was intrigued by the father. Just so you're aware, and I'm not talking about the crane father, I'm talking about the actual father who ends up, at the very beginning of the story, we know that the father has died, but you get some flashbacks to when he was alive and when he was talking to the daughter. And I don't know why, but I keep picking up books with terminal illness in them. And I'm not loving it, guys. I don't like that in books. It's not something that I really like to read. Honestly, I did think about DNFing this, even though it was only 150 pages, but it was by Kelly Barnhill, so I really wanted to give one of her adult books a try. I have read When We Were Dragons, which wasn't my favorite Kelly Barnhill, but it was okay. This one, I will never look back. Essentially, like, I'm not going to reread this. I do think that this is a book that would be good for discussions because, like I said, there are a lot of themes that I think would be really interesting to discuss with multiple people reading it at the same time. But overall, I just thought it was a little just sad, especially the ending. The ending is really sad, and yeah. So anyway, I rated this 3 stars, like I said. As far as the weirdness factor, I think that this is probably a 3 or a 4. I'm gonna go 3.5 star out of 5 for weirdness, just because he's a crane, and there's definitely some lore, some folk stories that you get to learn about that add a little bit of that to it, a little bit of weirdness, a little bit of confusion that you're trying to figure out what's going on. But yeah, it's not near the level of as, like, you know, Rouge. But, and then the intrigue, I would say, is probably a 2 out of 5, just because I wasn't interested. I from the first page, I kind of understood what was going to be happening from the tone of the book, so there wasn't a lot pushing me forward on that regard. It's not scary, so I would say a 0 out of 5 on that. And then it is slightly gory, but not really, so I would say probably a 1 or a 2, so I'll say a 1.5 on the gory scale, but it doesn't really focus on that. There are just a few instances where her mother ends up getting hurt that would add a little blood to the scene, but not not much. So those are the second two books that I wanted to talk to you guys about in this review vlog thing that I'm doing. And I will talk to you guys whenever I get to the fifth and sixth books. I'm back for the last two horror books for this vlog. This time I will be talking about The Bad Ones, which is a YA horror, and The Grave Eaters. Or no, Ghost Eaters. The first book that I will talk about is The Bad Ones, which I do own a physical copy of. I have absolutely been neglecting this book because when I picked this up, I bought it for the cover because I love the cover. But I didn't realize at the time that it is a YA book, and I usually don't get along with YA, which is fine. But I am pleasantly surprised. I ended up rating this a 4 out of 5 stars, and there are a few things that I didn't like about the end. And I will just briefly mention them, no spoilers, but the main premise of this book, if you haven't heard of The Bad Ones, you follow a main character whose best friend goes missing one night, and the story is her trying to figure out what happened to her best friend. On the night that her best friend went missing, 3 other people also went missing, and they all were in separate locations. And so people are trying to figure out, are they connected? Are they not connected? What's going on? And there's even like eyewitnesses of specific events where people just disappeared, like quite literally disappeared. And so yeah, there's a lot of mystery and intrigue going on with the missing people in this town. And one of the things, probably my favorite thing about this book, is the fact that it centers on local legends and lore, which I love when an author can take something like that and bring it onto the page. I love cryptids and folklore and myths and legends and people having, you know, different facts and different stories to go along with, but still connect back to what other people think. I just think it's fascinating. And so in this, you have something called the Goddess Game. And if you've ever played light as a feather, stiff as a board, like at a slumber party, it's kind of akin to that. It also is a jump rope rhyme, and which is just creepy in general when you hear people say this rhyme that sounds a little nefarious. And you get to learn about this local legend and how it impacts the young, the old. Everyone in this town knows about the Goddess Game. And so you get to learn about that throughout the book, and along with the mysteries. This has something that happens in a lot of YA books happen at the end, which I'm not a huge fan of. I know some people forgive it and they don't care, but it is a trope that I do not particularly enjoy. And then I also think that there is a lot of information in this book that is learned from our main character at a singular point in time. And I think that the author could have sprinkled in some of that information in different locations and it would have been better. I don't like, and I'm not saying that this is what it was because it's not, but I don't like a monologue at the end, which this wasn't even at the end, but like, I don't like one character standing up and being like, and this happened, and this happened, and this is why this happened, and this connects to this. I don't want that. I want to be given breadcrumbs throughout, and then, you know, at the end, maybe someone can show like, okay, these are how these things connect, but I should have already seen them. And that's not what happens in a major part of the mystery in this, which did kind of annoy me. And then there was one other thing about the end. You end up not really gaining the background information on what happens, like the main mystery. And I would have liked to have known, I would have liked to have dug into the nitty gritty of what actually was happening, because you think you know up to a certain point, and then you're like, okay, never mind. Maybe that was just me. Maybe the rest of you will be able to figure it out. But so I wish we would have dug in a little bit further at the end of the book instead of just leaving it up to the reader to figure out what exactly happened. And I'm not saying this is ambiguous. The ending is not ambiguous. You know, like, everything is tied up in the end, but the background information on something specific that you find out at the end isn't given. And that was kind of frustrating. But I did really enjoy it. For a YA horror, it reads really, really quick. And there are also character connections in this that I thought were really well done. There's a relationship in this where one of the things that I hate about a lot of YA books is you'll have all these crazy things going on, and they're more focused on their relationship and like wanting to get in there and, you know, kiss each other and snuggle and all this stuff. And you're like, these people are dying over here. Can we maybe take care of the emergency first? This doesn't do that. It has the characters constantly thinking about the things that are going on, even though they do have these moments of interest in one another. So I did appreciate that. And then the friendships within the story, I think, are really well done. And I did enjoy reading about the high school friendships that are within the story. So I would say this is a win for a YA horror for me. I don't rate many of them 4 stars. As far as a weirdness level, I would say this is probably a 1 out of 5. And then, because it's not super confusing. The intrigue, I would say, is probably a 4 out of 5 for me. The scary factor, I'll say a 3 out of 5, because there are definitely some moments that I was afraid for our main character and what was going on, but not enough that I could read this at night easily and it was fine. And then for gore, I think this is probably a 0 out of 5. There isn't really any gore. So yeah, overall, it's a success for me. Now, on to the not so successful book, which was The Ghost Eaters. I do have a couple more horror reads planned for the last couple of days of this month, so be looking at that. I'll be reading them on Halloween with you guys during sprints, so if you are interested in more horror, see me then. But The Ghost Eaters, I ended up rating a 2.5 star. If you guys haven't ever heard of this book, you follow a main character whose best friend ends up dying of a drug overdose. And her friend, the friend that dies, calls her right beforehand, and she doesn't pick up because she has decided that she doesn't want to enable his addiction. And so she has walked away from him, but he dies. And then, of course, she blames herself and spirals from this. Well, she finds out in trying to reconnect with him that he was looking into a drug that allows you to see ghosts. And so she, of course, wants to talk with him as he has already died and essentially redeem herself or ask for forgiveness. There's a lot going on in her head. And so she decides to also track the ghost seeing drug that is a potential that's out there. And I was hesitant to pick this up, and after reading it, it is probably something that I just should have avoided. I'm not the biggest fan of drug addiction and just substance abuse within storylines because of some people in my life who have had these experiences, and it's a little bit too close to home. And I do think that that was part of some of the things that were happening in this book. But even with that, I was intrigued with this scenario of having a drug that would allow you to see dead people, essentially, and I wanted to follow it. I think that I would have preferred had it not been about a drug addiction and just maybe about some type of magic that would allow you to see dead people. I don't know. I'm not going to try and rewrite the story, but I think that I can say that one of the reasons I didn't like this book is I don't think it's very atmospheric, which is a shame because it has a really cool premise, and I feel like I should have felt people staring at me. I should have felt these beings around me that I can't see. And I think there was a little bit of a missed opportunity there from the author. And maybe other people who read this think that it's atmospheric. I just didn't get those vibes. I also think that the substance abuse scenario within this book isn't handled the way I would want it to be. I don't think that it's not realistic. I just wish that there was, I don't know, like I guess I want there to be a moral of the story or something along those lines, some type of happy light. I've talked to you guys about this multiple times. I really don't like to read stories that don't have some light at the end, which is one of the problems I had with The Green Husband. I feel like the drug addiction in this, there are some elements where they talk about the destructiveness of drug addiction and also the destructiveness of unhealthy relationships. I do think there are strong themes within this book, you know, surrounding those topics, but I wish that there would have been avenues and further discussion on healing processes and growth from those experiences, and I really didn't get that in this book. There are a couple of twists at the end that I did like, but not enough for me to rate the book higher than a 2.5. I always tell you guys I can't rate things higher than a 3 if I'm not going to recommend them to people. Like if I don't know that I would be able to find an audience for this book, and I don't know that I would. It reads really quick, I will say that. So if the premise interests you, and I know that there are some really highly praising reviews on Goodreads, not a ton. I think this does have like a 3.37 on Goodreads as an average rating, but there are people who've given it 5 stars, people that I know who've given it 5 stars who've really enjoyed it. I just wasn't one of them. It does read really quick. So like I said, if you're interested and you want to give it a try, you think that it sounds like something you would enjoy, I would say go for it. I would love to chat with you about it, but just wasn't for me. As far as the weirdness factor goes, I would say a 2 out of 5. There are some elements in this that are a little odd. Then the intrigue, probably a 2 out of 5. Again, this I think is probably the most disappointing thing because I do really like the premise of this and I think it could have gone a lot of places and it just didn't. And then the scariness factor, I don't think that this was scary. I think that there were a couple of scenes that were gross and meant to be really impactful for the main character, but because it wasn't atmospheric, it wasn't eerie, I didn't feel like I was in her shoes, it just wasn't scary for me. So I would say this is probably a 1 out of 5 on the scary factor. It is a little gory in certain places, but not to an extreme. So I would say maybe a 2 out of 5. Those are the 6 books that I have read for this horror vlog. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys found at least one of the books interesting, and maybe I've given you some homework to read for Halloween if you guys are looking for a spooky suggestion for your Halloween reads. What spooky season reads have you guys picked up in the month of October? Do you have any suggestions for me for Halloween? If you don't feel like chatting, or if you just want to let me know that you're here, leave me something to do with a theme park. So I don't know if there's like a little Ferris wheel or balloons, anything that you think deems a theme park, because Fantasticland was definitely my favorite book of this vlog. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!